And maybe that's why he's God and we are humans. I'd like to read to you from Galatians chapter 4. It reads in verse 4, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because we are sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, 'Abba, Father.'" And so here it says that in the fullness of time, Jesus came, Mary gave birth. And so that's what I kind of want to talk about this morning, the fullness of time. You know, it cannot have been convenient and comfortable for a young teenager, a high school student, to be pregnant, especially before she got married. There's nothing comfortable, nothing convenient, and dare I say, nothing godly about the situation. Nothing good about it. A teenage girl getting pregnant. Mary was not married. She had just been promised. She was only engaged. It's just difficult. Timing. It doesn't seem as though God got it right. Right? I mean, wouldn't it be better to get Mary pregnant after she got married? Right? When things were politically in Israel better? I mean, why do it at such an inconvenient time? Right? Make sure that they have enough funds to raise a family, right? I mean, don't you guys save up for marriage and weddings and pregnancies, right? You plan when your wife is going to get pregnant. All right, when we've saved enough money, that's when we're going to get married. Yes, after we have a house, that's when we're going to deliver. Perfect timing, God. Why can't you be like us? And so I want to talk to you a little bit about this. How Mary doesn't complain when things are really bad, right? From God's perspective, for him it was perfect, but for us, it was incredibly inconvenient, may I add, terrible. The first, I want to talk to you about this phrase here that Paul uses, the fullness of time. What does that mean in Galatians chapter 4? Fullness of time, it means when something had become ripe, right? When an apple is ripe, that's when you eat it. You never want to eat an avocado that's hard, right? You want an avocado that's perfectly ripe. When it's soft, that's when you eat it. When the time was perfect, God sent forth his Son to be the Savior of the world. And if you look from Genesis all the way to the end, you see traces, you see whispers that God the Father is going to do something, that he's going to send someone to deliver us from our troubles. You see it when Adam and Eve sin in the garden, when they betray God and they start feeling shame and they become alienated from God and even alienated from one another. God hints that he's going to send someone that is going to kind of eradicate or to make better the situation that Adam had done to himself and others. When Abraham was just a nomad out there in the Middle East, God reveals himself to him and said, "Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation, and so I need you to move to this place." And when he gets there with his wife, they're really old. They don't have any children yet. And God says, through your seed, that means you're going to have children. Well, Lord, you keep saying things are going to happen, but guess what? My wife over there hiding behind the tent, mocking us as we talk right now, she's not pregnant. And guess what? I'm not a young lad anymore. It's hard for me to move, let alone have children. It's not going to happen. And so he says, no, through your seed, there's going to be a nation that's going to be born. They're going to be a blessing to many people. Time, generations pass, and one of Abraham's great-great-grandchildren becomes king of Israel, King David. He gets enthroned on as the king of Israel. And God meets him as well and says, you know, King David, I know you're going to be king. And you're a king for a while, but one of your children, one of your offspring in the future, he's not going to be a king just for a period. Actually, he's going to be a king for ever and ever and ever. His kingdom will not end. So the first point that I want to share with you this morning is this. Christ, he arrived just at the right time. and for many, many reasons. When he came, it was the right time, the perfect time, as opposed to coming a couple hundred years earlier, or even a couple of hundred years afterwards. Because if you're a student of history, you realize that when Jesus was born, it was like the most perfect time to come and start a new revolution or a new movement. First of all, the Romans had many faults, but God kind of allowed the Roman Empire to flourish and the Greeks before them to allow the timing of Christ's birth and perfect timing to allow the rapid expansion of this young Christianity. Number one, there was relative, more than ever before, religious freedom. The Romans believed that their Caesar, that their king was a god. And they said throughout the Roman Empire, all of you guys must bow to Caesar as God. But there was a small little country they had conquered. It's called the nation of Israel. The Jews, they were a little bit more adamant about not following the Roman Empire rule. They said to the Romans, I know we got this thing, but we can't worship any god other than our God. And they were just resiliently against the Roman rule. And guess what the mighty Roman Empire did? Everyone else had to bow down before the emperor except for the Jews. Isn't that amazing? They allowed the Jews, the land of Israel, to have religious liberty. You can worship your God and you don't have to bow down before our emperor. Just them. Christianity was an offshoot of the Jewish people, religion. And so when the Romans saw Christianity rising, they said, oh, they're the Jews. We give them exemption. And so Christianity, when it was born, it was still allowed to talk about God and still worship God without having to bow down before the Roman emperor. Not only did they have religious freedom, they also had political. It's truly amazing how all of this came together. Julius Caesar, when he was assassinated, a couple decades before Jesus was born, there was kind of political unrest, civil wars in the Roman Empire. But immediately afterwards, Caesar Augustus took power, and there was basically peace from war for over 200 years. Before that, it was wars after wars, and even after that, there was going to be wars after wars. But during that time period, politically, there was peace all throughout the known world. If you know history, it's called Pax Romana. And during this time of peace, something that was not achieved before, roads were made all throughout the ancient Near East. You know what? Economics, things don't spread without good roads. And not only that, not only do you need roads, you need protection as people caravan through these ancient routes. And the Romans, during time of peace, they had made great roads and protection for those who were traveling. I mean, that is amazing. It wouldn't have happened 200 years before. It would not have happened 200 years afterwards because of wars. But the time was fertile. Not only were they politically, it was very good. It was also culturally optimal. You guys know about Alexander the Great. Right before the Romans conquered the world, he kind of conquered the known world at the time. And what Alexander the Great did was, he kind of made all of the ancient Near East, all the known civilizations at the time, speak one language. Do you know what that was? It was the language of culture and economic. It was Greek. Everyone had to learn Greek in order to do business. Do you know what our New Testament is written in? What language? It's written in Greek. Before the Bible came, it was already, the foundations have been laid for the spread, the written word to spread all throughout the ancient Near East. And so you got to understand this, the fullness of time. How is it that God couldn't save us before? Why isn't it that God couldn't save us afterwards? At this moment in time, there was religious tolerance. Up until 70 AD, Jews and the Christians, they were able to worship their God without having to bow down before emperor. There was political rest, peace, roads, protection for those who were traveling along the roads. There was the same language. The spread of any movement could have been made with ease because people spoke a common language. But more than that, spiritually, as you know, the Greeks and the Romans, they popularized something that was not very popular before. It was philosophy. You get great guys like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They started to ask questions publicly. What is the meaning of life? And just then, when curiosity about life and the meaning of the universe was at its peak, Christ was born. And it's almost like this young Christian movement sowed the seed of, hey, these are the reasons why things happen in this world. So the third point that I want to share with you today is this, is that God, He seems to use terrible, maybe even frustrating times or conditions to achieve great good in His timing. Mary being pregnant before marriage is not the perfect timing. How many would you agree to that? If my college daughter, who's a sophomore in college, comes to me, Dad, I'm pregnant. You know what I would say? Don't tell anyone. We are moving to Africa. Don't post this on Instagram, right? Don't let anybody know. It's not convenient. Actually, it's not even a good thing. May I say it's not even a godly thing. Mary getting pregnant before she gets married, that is not a godly thing. God, what are you doing? It's wrong. It's not right. This should not be happening to me. It's not the right time. This is a result of bad things, Lord. And yet, God can use even terrible, tragic situations, frustrating conditions to achieve a great good. It was bad timing for Mary to be unwed and at the same time pregnant. One of my favorite stories in the Old Testament is the story of Joseph. Joseph. How many of you guys want to be the most powerful person in the known civilization? Raise your hand. No one? Come on, you guys didn't wake up right. I'm sure you thought about winning the lottery, haven't you? Okay, right? What happens if you win the lottery? You're the king of the universe, right? You can do whatever you want. Maybe you don't want to be the president of the United States, but you want to be the ruler of the world. But would you be able to go through terrible situations and circumstances to get there? Joseph was the second most powerful leader in the known world at the time. But if you ask him, Joseph, is it worth it? Was it all worth it? So he could be the second in line to the Pharaoh, the most powerful leader? He would probably say, yes, it was worth it. It was worth it to be sold into slavery. It was worth it to be sent in jail unjustly. Yes, it was worth it. Was it good? Was it right? Was it righteous? You say, no. All of these things were bad in and of themselves. But what it produced afterwards, hey, I'm living proof that life is good. You know what he was. He was 12 years old. Favorite son of Judah, right? Jacob, I'm sorry. Yes, I am a pastor. The youngest son, the favorite son. All the older brothers are wearing regular clothes. They're like wearing, clothes from terrible places, Pick and Save or thrift store. And the youngest son gets clothes from the mall, right? It's like, hey, why does he get clothes from the mall and we have to get secondhand clothing here, right? If that were you, your brothers would want to get rid of you. And that's what they did to Joseph. They brought that colored robe and brought it before Jacob, the father, and the father assuming, because there's blood all over it, that his youngest son had been ravaged by the wild animals. But you know what happened? He didn't get killed. Instead, he was sold into slavery. And being sold into slavery at the time is probably worse than death itself. But you know what happened afterwards he was sold into slavery? He was brought into Egypt. And Potiphar, one of the high-ranking officers in the court, decided to use Joseph as one of his hired servants. But Joseph was a good-looking guy. And you know what happens to good-looking guys, right? Women like good-looking guys. And Potiphar's wife really had the hots for him and made advances. Hey, I want to have you. And Joseph, being a righteous man, he says, no, I can't do this. Potiphar's wife, not someone to be rejected. As soon as her husband comes, why did you allow this slave to come? He tried to rape me. Unjustly, he goes to jail. I mean, it's terrible. Injustice upon injustice. But you know what happens afterwards? He rises to fame and power. He becomes second in command, the prime minister of the most powerful country in the known world. You know, when the land was in famine, he saw his brothers coming to Egypt because they were in famine as well. They needed land. And fast forward, they saw their youngest brother, whom they had sold into slavery, become this powerful man. They thought they were going to get killed now. Revenge. But Joseph, looking at his brothers, don't fear. All of your bad choices, all of your mistakes, seemingly unwise decisions, they are all meant for good. I am here. I'm going to protect you guys. So God, here's another point that I want to share. God uses our choices, even bad choices that we make. I'm not saying go and start making more bad choices. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But the regrets of life. The things that we were not so wise at the time to do. God uses even our bad choices, even evil choices, and He somehow choreographs them for His good purpose. Another book in the Old Testament that's great about this is the book of Esther. You know who Esther was? She's this child, and her uncle says, you know what? Why don't you do something with your life? Well, what can I do? Well, why don't you become one of the women that sleep with the king every night? Just be basically selling her into prostitution for the king. I mean, no matter how you look at this book, you don't think of Esther as a godly woman. But somehow through circumstances, she comes out to save an entire ethnic group of Jews from certain extermination. It's truly amazing. You don't have to be famous in the Bible for God to use. He uses many different people in the same similar fashion. Proverbs chapter 16 says, many are the plans of man. I don't know about you, but I got many plans. I've got an exit strategy. I got an option for this. I got an option for the option to make my options better. Do you know what I mean? All of us. But he says, but the Lord ultimately determines our steps. It's not to say that our choices are free. We don't have freedom. But what he's saying is that he uses all of these collective choices and freedoms for his good will. It's like an incredible chef who puts together all these ingredients. By themselves, they're terrible. You would never want to eat those individual ingredients, but mixed together comes out this incredible stew. J.I. Packer, a respected theologian, talking about this subject, he says, a paradox. We are free in our choices, and yet God sovereignly uses our free choices to achieve His perfect purpose. God is sovereign. We have free will. Somehow it's all mixed together. Don't think too deeply about it because you'll become a pastor like myself. And that's terrible. You don't want to be confused, right? But it's a mystery. It is a paradox. Earlier this year, I decided to move into the dark side. I was a Android Samsung fan all my life, and because of peer pressure, demons surrounding me, my wife, my daughters, I decided, okay, I'll buy an Apple product as well. I got an Apple phone. Yes, Darth Vader, that's me. It's a great phone. And you know, the guy who popularized or started the company, his name is Steve Jobs. He passed away. Back in 2005, he gave this wonderful speech. You can listen to it on YouTube at Stanford University. A very short speech, but he talked about this very subject. Now, he doesn't believe in God. He believes in some powerful force out in the universe. But what he shared in his speech has a lot of application, and it helps us to understand how different points in our lives can connect for a greater good. Looking forward, it doesn't seem as though my dot in life right now connects to anything meaningful. Do you remember in high school when you said to your teacher, why am I taking this class? Is this going to help me at all in life? Right? When you took Algebra 2 Trig, why am I taking this class? It's not going to make any meaning whatsoever, right? But you look back at events in life, you start, because of hindsight, you can connect the dots and say, no wonder our first daughter was born at that time. No wonder I got into that car accident. As a result of that, this thing, no wonder I got rejected from that job. Because of rejection from that job, I was able to be at this job. You connect the dots in hindsight, but looking forward, you go, God, where are you? So Steve Jobs, he talks about how when he was born to parents that did not want him. Mom wanted to adopt him, get rid of him. And so eventually he was given up for adoption at the promise that he was going to go to college. Adopted parents promised. Well, he did go to college eventually after being adopted. He went to Reed College. He dropped out after a year and a half because he thought that the high tuition, just wasting his adopted parents' money on senseless education, didn't make any sense for him. But as he dropped out of Reed College, he still continued to take classes. And he says back at the time, he took one very insignificant, fun class at the time. It was a calligraphy class. It was a class about how to, write and write well. It's about spacing between letters, the height and width, and how that appeals to the eye in the senses very differently. That's where he learned a lot about, the serif font, the sans serif font, all kinds of different faces, all kind of bold, all kind of dark. And what he realized that at Reed College at the time, in the United States, it was the most kind of popular school to attend. You would see posters all over college with the most incredible writings. Well, fast forward 10 years, he started the company, Macintosh, Apple. And as they were creating the computer and all the fonts that were going, he remembered the class that he took at Reed College, the very insignificant class that didn't seem to make any sense, right? I mean, how many of you guys, if you're going to send your children to a private college, spend over $100,000 a year, I know by experience, you tell your children, you know what? Just take whatever class you want, even if it's not required. Just have fun. No good thinking economical parent would ever say that. But he took that class, and when he was making the computer, that's when all the beautiful visual effect of looking at a Microsoft computer an Apple computer came into view. And later Microsoft copied that same technology. Well, Apple just became incredible, right? Incredible fortune. And guess what? At one of its highest points, they decided to get rid of Steve Jobs. You know that happened, right? He was basically removed. He was the founder of the company. He had hired an associate to help him. The company was at an odd of which direction to go to. The board of directors decided to let Steve Jobs go and keep the guy that Steve Jobs hired as the lead. Steve Jobs was devastated. He was only 30 years old. But it was at this time, soon after, he developed a company called Pixar. He developed another company that Apple computers would later use as its basic rudiment for the next generation of computers. And he says, if he was not removed from Apple Computer, he would never have met the love of his life, which was his wife. Getting fired from your company that you started, it doesn't seem right. But you start to connect the dots and you realize, no wonder those things happened. I now see in perspective that this event connected to this event. And I am now here. But Lord, why are you not taking care of this situation right now? Each thought in itself doesn't make sense, but if it connects to other things that have been carefully brought together by the loving hands of an all-sovereign God, we can say, it hurts, but I'll say yes. It doesn't make sense, but I will go through it. The question is where are you right now? And will you be able to trust God? You know, when Mary decided to say, or found herself before this angel, and the angel said, you're going to bear a child. I mean, talk about a disruption. Talk about, this is not right. I don't deserve this to happen. I mean, I'm doing everything right, and now I am pregnant? I have to deal with this? It doesn't make any... God, you're a loving God. You're not supposed to allow these things to happen to me. And yet, if anyone could have complained, right? If anyone could have said, I need to check myself into a doctor right now. If anyone could have said, you know what, I'll resign and find another. It could have been Mary. Amen? I mean, if anyone deserved the pity party, it was Mary. But I don't know how this woman did it. The angel visits her and says, this is what you've been dealt in life right now. She thinks about it, she listens, and she replies, yes, may it be to me as you have said. I'm sure Mary, looking back in her life now, even after the death of her son on the cross, but after the resurrection, and after the resurrection, when she sees the people getting baptized in the first couple books of Acts, and the church growing, she might have said, now I see how all of these events were choreographed by God. These terrible circumstances, even the death of my own son, for an incredible good. I would never change anything in my life. And friends, that's where we find ourselves here this morning. You came to church, and there are a lot of seemingly meaningless points in your life. Godly decisions mixed with terrible decisions. And God, somehow in His goodness and love towards you, is going to choreograph it for an incredible purpose. I do not know. I'm not saying you're going to be like an Esther. I'm not saying you're like an Abraham, but maybe there's something that God has in store for you. Not maybe, I know. Amen. I know. Because He loves every one of you. He doesn't just marry the Marys of the world, the Esthers of the King Davids, or the Abrahams of the world. He loves every one of you. That's why He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to die on that cross, to tell you that what is happening to your life, soon at the fullness of time, God is going to come through. Amen. And He did. He forgave us of our sins. And He gave us life everlasting for those of us who confess Jesus as His Lord and Savior. As the praise team comes up, I'd like for you to close your eyes.